This podcast uses adult language. Listener discretion is advised.
This is Kevin.
This is Elisabeth.
And this is the Lesson 83 podcast. So today we're going to talk a little bit about coming out in our first segment. In our second segment, we're going to talk about the Relationship Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
Elisabeth, coming out. It's a big deal. Today is actually, as we're recording it, National Coming Out Day.
Yep, October 11th.
Do you want to give a definition for coming out?
Sure. I'm queer, and so I feel like I am pretty steeped in the thinky thoughts about coming out generally. So yeah, and National Coming Out Day, of course, is about LGBTQ issues, and we're going to talk about the crossover and some of the differences in a sec. I would say that coming out is just making a decision to be public with a small group or a large group of people about who you are. And usually that's about LGBTQ identities. But in this case, we're going to talk about coming out as polyamorous.
So why do people tend to decide to come out?
A lot of reasons. We talked just briefly before starting to record. You mentioned some people are just bad at lying, and I like that, actually. Yep.
I fall under that category.
Me too.
I'm very bad at lying.
Me too. And I'd prefer not to. It's really just laziness.
It's hard. It's hard to keep up a farce or to pretend that you aren't dating multiple people if you are, or aren't okay with that at the very least.
Right. And so I completely agree. I prefer a life of authenticity when possible, and it has definitely lost me things and people, which we're also going to mention. But yeah, so I guess like just desiring to be truthful really is a big reason to people come out for any reason, you know. So that's a big one. And I think
we can also come out in order to normalize polyamory or whatever other identity, to humanize something that might be alien to other people. Usually putting a name and a face to it can really help personalize that for people who maybe don't identify or who are scared to identify. Yeah,
very true. Normalization is important. I think it's a big part of why more people in America support like same-sex marriage now, because because of National Coming Out Day, we now know that most people know someone who's queer. And if polyamory had the same movement of coming out that the queer community does, then maybe the normalization would help people understand. Maybe it would change our laws and all that. So I think normalization is a great point and very important in our safety as people who have identities that aren't mainstream.
Yep. We can also come out in order to legitimize a non-primary relationship. So if you're dating two people, one of them you've been dating for a very long time and to the public is your partner, you may have had to hide someone else in the closet with you if you were not out. And so being able to legitimize that relationship to the public, to be able to pretend or be able to act out the fact that you are in a relationship and hold hands and be seen in public together can really help those types of relationships.
Yeah, I think being in a secondary or non-live-in relationship can be tough because you are often kind of like shunted to the side in regards to what the mainstream sees as legitimate, right?
Yep. You may not be welcome at family events, or if you are, you're the friend and not the partner.
Yeah, we've been there, huh? I hear you. That's right.
Anything else that you can think of that would be good to point out as to why people come out?
I feel like those are the main reasons, but I really believe that, circling back to authenticity, that it's just valuable to, and normalization really goes hand in hand, I think, because the more queer people we know, the more poly people we know, the more people will go, oh, okay, I get that. You know, that's not me, but I know someone who's queer, or I know someone who's polyamorous, right? So I really do feel we can change the world slowly that way. So coming out to me is like kind of a service to the world. Maybe that sounds arrogant, but I feel like it's beneficial for all of us who are marginalized in our identities or not seen as mainstream, because the more we are authentic, the more people will go, oh, that is real. That's a real thing. And then, you know, we'll have less of these issues. So, yeah, I think it all ties together.
So in a little bit, we're going to talk about some of the risks of coming out. But first, I wanted to maybe talk a little bit of how people might view coming out to different people in their lives. And I've broken it into 3 groups, and maybe we'll add on if you and I think of anything as we're going. Sure. But, coming out to friends, for me especially, was very easy. I really had a fairly accepting group of friends, and, that's going to be different for everybody, depending on if your friends might be socially conservative or you don't think that they'll be accepting. You may have to play a little game of figuring out what they might be okay with.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. Very good point.
So family, I think family is the one where people have maybe the most trouble because they're the group that are sometimes most intertwined in your personal life and want to share space with you in a way where it becomes important for your partner to participate at times, going to weddings or Thanksgiving dinners or what have you.
Yep. I think coming out to family can be the most harrowing for
yes.
people, whether they're coming out as queer or as polyamorous. I think that my coming out certainly didn't go well with my family. And I went to a family event yesterday and could only bring one of my partners because they weren't cool with that. They were not cool with my quote unquote lifestyle. And they said it's a lot. It's just a lot. And to me, that's confusing because that seems equivalent to forcing me to choose one child to bring to a family event rather than...
It's more than one. More than one is bigger than one.
Yeah, it's bigger than one. What in the heck? So it blows my mind. But that's how they feel. And I think the more I live my life authentically, the more they'll understand slowly over time that this is real, this is normal, this is genuine, this is healthy, and this is not even unusual for humans.
Yeah.
I don't believe that humans are an inherently monogamous species as a whole. So I think we have variety, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, coming out to family is tough. It can be really tough. I think that's the most stressful for people. Because with work, which we'll get to right in a sec, you can always theoretically find another job, right? Even if you get fired for whatever reason. So maybe there's another job out there, but is there another set of parents for you out there? That's different, What was your experience like coming out to your family?
I talked about it a little bit before in previous episodes, so I'll try to keep it short, but it was mixed. And, as I've been doing this for a decade, it becomes a very neutral fact and occasionally only comes up when my parents don't want to hear about it or when I shouldn't be talking about it to my grandmother, according to my parents at times. And I've always been of the opinion that I'm going to be honest with people. And so if people ask me questions, I'm going to answer them in whatever way I feel is appropriate.
Yeah.
So other people's experiences I might be able to better tap into because I know some people through the groups I help run that have come out to their family and it blows up in their face, or conversely, that they find out that their parents used to be swingers 8 years before they were born. And so it doesn't really surprise them at all.
Yeah. That's happened to me multiple times, actually. Well, not with my family, but with my partner's families, I think I've dated multiple people whose parents are swingers and they're like, oh, okay, we got that, I guess, Oh, you add love? All right, that's fine, I guess. Yeah.
But for the people where it became contentious, I've seen it cause people to have to be excommunicated from their family, for lack of a better word, where they are no longer invited or aren't allowed to bring anybody with them, or like your circumstance, they can only bring one.
Got to choose one of the people I love. Can't have more than one.
And so I think that's the main reason why people are scared, is they're worried about having a change in their relationship dynamic with the family members who aren't accepting.
Yeah.
And that fear of not knowing being very front of mind. The things that I can kind of talk about that has helped, or to give people an idea of what might happen if you come out to your family. I've heard people where their parents were very quiet and didn't ask any questions, and then sent them a long text or email later about how things were wrong or bad.
Yeah.
I've had people come out to their family and their family have a lot of good, healthy questions and want to know and be willing to look at additional information. They're little piece of like printed material that you might be able to provide to your family if you're coming out to be able to answer some of the questions that maybe you don't want to answer.
Or digital links.
Yeah. So if you search Google for that, you might be able to find it. Just some of the bare bones basics of polyamory can help avoid a lot of the weird sexual questions that sometimes we get asked by the people who we don't want to know about our sex lives, like our family.
Yeah.
And talking about people we don't want to know about our sex lives, except for maybe people in your position, work coming out as being polyamorous within a work setting. I think this tends to be a little easier for a lot of people because it's very easy to obfuscate and just not talk about it. In many professional environments, it just the most that you talk about is over the water cooler. Like you can just say you're my partner this, my partner that.
Yeah. When I worked in a gender studies department for several years, it was very liberal. Obviously, it was wonderful, actually, in a lot of ways. And I was very out as polyamorous and queer, obviously, from the beginning. And they never, ever batted an eye, ever. My boss met several of my partners at once and never had a problem because it was a liberal setting that already understood things like gender spectrum identities and LGBTQ orientations. But polyamory was not new for them. They all knew what it was. So, but not every workplace is like that, obviously. So I had a good experience with that, but I've always been pretty open. Although about a decade ago, I remember I worked in a daycare. This must have been 11 or 12 years ago. And I mentioned my boyfriend and my fiance alternately, kind of. And then one of my coworkers realized that these were two separate people. She finally caught on. She was like, wait a minute, wait a second. And I was like, yeah, there's two people. And they were like, she was like, I knew you were like that or something. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but okay. But I do find that, yeah, it can be a lot of interesting responses because you don't always get to choose who you work with, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've always been very careful and done it. I very much treat it as not a big deal.
Right.
I feel like that's kind of harder to do around family, especially if it's a little bit charged. But around work, it's very easy for me to be blasé and just like be like, yep, this is normal to me. And so therefore it's normal.
Yeah.
And when talking to my friends, I very much framed it as how it felt very normal to me. And I wasn't the only one doing this. And I think that really helps. If you come in with an air of this is just how it is and I'm not really concerned about your opinion on it, that sometimes that can help.
Yeah. Normalization.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about reasons for staying in the closet, and then we can talk about what it's like and maybe similarities and differences between coming out as polyamorous and other ways.
Sure.
What are some reasons why people might want to stay in the closet?
Well, there are definitely risks. Polyamory is in many ways illegal in America. What's that A word that means you're cheating?
Adultery.
Thank you. Already erased it from my vocabulary. Yeah, adultery is illegal in many forms. If they really want to prosecute, during a divorce or something, and you're polyamorous, maybe there are bad situations in which people can use that against you.
Yeah.
You can also be fired. I had a partner who was fired for being polyamorous. He tried to change which of his partners was on his health insurance, and they were like confused because they were like, well, you have to have lived with your new partner for at least 6 months. And he was like, well, I have, we all live together. And they were like, oh, you're fired.
That's bonkers.
It was bonkers. And it was a huge healthcare company that is theoretically pretty liberal, but it's just like they just weren't even curious or interested in any explanations. It was a real harrowing experience. But yeah, they just were like, well, clearly you're trying to commit fraud because, this can't be real. And he was like, it definitely is.
There's a whole support group in our city for this type of lifestyle.
Oh yeah.
Or a
Absolutely.
Relationship dynamic, however you want to define it.
Yeah. I think that people do worry about rejection mostly when they come out as anything. And people do get rejected, obviously, by their family, by their workplace, maybe by their friends. Depends. So rejection is probably one of the main concerns about and losing the relationships, which is kind of the same thing.
Yep. And if you're in an area where there might be a strong rumor mill or lots of people who might cast judgment on you,
right?
If they've found out, that can be a reason to be more inclined to stay in the closet.
Yeah.
Anything else before we move on to coming out in other ways?
Trying to think. You and I are both pretty out, so it's like harder to think of reasons not to be. But I'm thinking.
I mean, all the things that we have listed are pretty capital B big deals.
Yeah, capital B bad.
Yeah.
You're right. And I've been lucky, like you in many ways, in my coming out. The family members that hate polyamory also hate that I'm queer, so I'm not surprised at all that they reject those elements of who I am. So that was not a surprise, and I expected it. But it is still sad that it's impossible for them to comprehend loving more than one person. And it really blows my mind. I know I talk about this, but I can have 2 parents, 2 siblings, 2 pets, 2 children, 2 jobs, 2 names, 2 storage units, 2 cars, 2 houses, but 2 romantic partners is like somehow obscene or immoral or impossible. And I don't understand why that would be the case. We can have so much other love in our lives, but as soon as it's romantic, that's a problem. It's really weird to me.
I mean, cultural norms don't have to make sense. They're not
Very
obligated
true.
to make sense. And
so right.
Unfortunately, that's just the nature of it.
You're right. It sucks. Yeah, that's all.
I mean, that's the reason why, even though it's legitimate, why there was such pushback to allow for gay marriage. So speaking of gay marriage, my excellent pivot.
Good job.
I don't really have a dog in this fight because I consider myself straight. And I think the only way I've really ever felt compelled to come out is as polyamorous. So why don't you talk a little bit about your thoughts on how this is similar or different to coming out in other ways?
Sure.
Or anything that you feel like is relevant that people should know about coming out for other identities.
Right. Well, when we think of coming out, I think most people think of LGBTQ issues first, right? So, like I've said, I'm queer, I'm pansexual, and non-binary. So definitely in the LGBTQ community, and have been my whole adult life. And I've known that I was at least bisexual since I was 4 years old. So I've always been firmly in the queer camp. And I am usually mistaken for straight, as I come off as very feminine, and people assume that I identify as a cis female. So I feel like I have to come out often in that regard because people go, well, you're dating a man or 2 men or whatever, so you must be straight. Or because I look a certain way, they assume that. So I am often coming out as queer and polyamorous. So I think that it's the similarities are simply that, these are both non-mainstream identities, being poly or queer, and not always accepted by mainstream society, by conservative religious society, etc. So those are the similarities, but there's also a lot of discussion, I guess, around even the word lifestyle, which we've probably talked about. I consider lifestyle to be kind of an insinuation of choice. Like, I can choose to be vegan, I can choose to have pink hair, I can choose to wear pants or skirts. Those are those are choices. But can I choose to be straight or bisexual? No. And in the poly community, I think there's even a lot of discussion about whether polyamory is a lifestyle or an orientation, or what that even means, right?
Yeah, I have one thought on this.
Sure,
and
yeah.
I think that it boils down to one of the main things in polyamory. It depends. It depends on whether you feel like you were born this way. How core is it to your identity? Is it just a relationship dynamic to you, or is it something that infiltrates your life and impacts how you view and interact with the world in more profound ways?
It's definitely individual in a lot of ways. I personally feel that, I don't know, 11 years ago, if you'd asked me, I would have said that polyamory is the logical choice for me. I saw no benefit to monogamy. I didn't have any draw to monogamy. It made no sense to me. I didn't want it for myself. However, I do feel more and more that polyamory is inherent, but maybe not just to me, maybe to humanity in a way. Because again, like, love has so many forms: sibling love, parental love, familial love, love for your friends, love for your, like your cousins, your grandmother, your coworkers, maybe, your besties. Those are all forms of love. And I don't understand why romantic love would be different, or why romantic love would need to be monogamous to be legitimate. So maybe it's contentious a bit, but I do feel that polyamory is both logical for me and inherent. So maybe it's both a choice and an orientation. Again, it depends, right?
Yeah, I think it really does depend. I always get my hackles up a little bit when people say that it's a sexual orientation, because polyamory to me is much more about love, and that would kind of exclude in some way possibly people who are like
asexual,
ace or yeah.
Well, wouldn't that mean swinging is a sexual orientation? Because
it could be, but I also, like, because I don't identify that way, I don't want to speak for those people.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
I don't identify as a swinger because I just prefer I like the romantic elements as well of my relationships. And many of them are sexual, but the polyamory literally means many loves, right? So it's a romantic identity, if anything.
Yeah.
So again, you're right. Like, there are plenty of asexual polyamorous people. It has nothing to do with sex. It's about love.
I feel like I have tactfully sidestepped this a lot of the time by just describing it as a relationship dynamic. Because no matter what, at its core, polyamory is that. And whether it is any of those other things that we were talking about.
Yeah, you're right.
It really doesn't matter as much as whether it's a relationship dynamic, which is the easiest way to convey it, just like monogamy as a relationship dynamic. Well, I think we covered some great ground about coming out. Maybe we'll revisit this topic a little bit more. We would love to hear your opinions. So please send us an email, send us a DM on Twitter, find us on Reddit. And up next, we're going to be talking about the Relationship Bill of Rights.
Awesome.
Which is a great way to help preserve your happiness in a relationship.
Yes,
so stay tuned.
Bye.
I'm Kevin.
I'm Elisabeth.
And this is the Lesson 83 podcast. So welcome back, Elisabeth.
Good to see you.
Good to see you over Skype. Because currently we're in a bit of a health crisis in America.
There's a virus.
So we're doing the responsible thing. We're doing this remote today.
We are. And we're millennials. We can handle it.
Thank you for joining me, Elisabeth. We wanted to talk a little bit about the Relationship Bill of Rights, which is something that the author of More Than Two put together. I'm sure it wasn't like solely their idea or concept, but we're using their version of it because I like it.
Yeah, I like it too.
Something to be mindful of is that the author of More Than Two has a complicated and sordid history, and you can look that up and see if that impacts your views of what he has to say. I think he has good information here, and I try to use what I feel like he did right, at least.
Yeah, I reference people to the More Than Two website pretty often, even though it came out that he had problematic relationships and history and whatnot. So definitely to be taken with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start, and then you can go to the second point after we've kind of talked about it.
So the Relationship Bill of Rights is basically a list of points that are things that you have the right to do and have in a relationship. And like Kevin just said, the first half is just any relationship, all intimate relationships. And the second half we're going to do is poly relationships specifically. So yeah, the Relationship Bill of Rights is basically you have the right without shame, blame, or guilt to blah, blah, blah. And now we're going to start with the points.
So you have the right without shame, blame, or guilt to be free from coercion, violence, and intimidation. So that sounds pretty obvious when you put it that way, but I've seen a lot of people have bad relationships. Do you have anything you want to add about that topic or that point?
It's an important one. I think that's why it's first. The coercion thing can come in. I've had experiences where, basically I've been unicorn hunted, and it was a form of coercion at the time, like in that situation. And so I would say that it's a great point to keep in mind, because if you feel like you're being coerced into anything, a relationship, a sexual situation, anything, that's a big red flag. So if someone says, hey, I'll date you, but you have to date my spouse as well, that's coercion.
Yeah. And just to kind of give a definition in case people miss the episode about unicorn hunting, we use unicorn hunting to mean any of the unethical practices of two people looking for a single partner to solely date them. So not all triad relationships, or
certainly not.
Even seeking out a triad relationship, just the unhealthy versions of that. And if you want more information, go check out our episode on unicorn hunting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right in that it being first is definitely a point to be considered about how important it is.
Yeah, definitely.
So do you want to take on the next one?
Sure, yeah. So you have the right to choose the level of involvement and intimacy you want. And I think that one's great too. I think we're going to say that for all of them. To choose the level of involvement and intimacy you want. So in any relationship, you get to decide whether you live together, whether you have a sexual relationship, whether you have a romantic relationship, because every relationship is unique and different. And there are asexual people, there are aromantic people, and these people can be polyamorous as well, because although polyamory focuses primarily on multiple romantic relationships, there are many different ways to have a relationship. So, so choosing the level of involvement and intimacy you want is important, because if your partner is like, I want to have sex every day, and you're like, oh, I just want to have sex once a month, then you need to figure out whether you're compatible, or whether you need to, have your needs met somewhere else, or whether you shouldn't be together. So, yeah, does that make sense?
Definitely. And I think something to put a more finer point on than what they discuss for that aspect of the Relationship Bill of Rights is that it's something that should be mutually agreed upon.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And, they're kind of alluding to that, but it's important to mutually agree upon those aspects of your relationship.
Definitely. Yeah.
So the next point they have is to revoke consent to any form of intimacy at any time.
Yeah.
I think you and I are both big proponents of consent culture, and that consent is very, very important and sexy. Mm-hmm. But outside of that, do you think that there should be anything added to or altered about that point?
I don't think it should be altered. I do think that people forget that, like, for example, if you agree to, you've got a date tonight with your partner and you get sexy together and you're in the middle of sexy times, and then something changes, whether it's your headspace or it could be anything. It could be literally anything. Maybe you're just not in the mood anymore. I have safe worded out of threesomes before, because I'm just like, I don't like this. I'm not into it anymore, and I'm out, and that's my right, because I shouldn't have to follow through and finish the sexual act just because I consented to it at the beginning, because consent can absolutely be revoked. And so maybe it could be literally anything. You don't need a reason to revoke consent, and you don't have to explain yourself. Although I think that, within especially a romantic ongoing sexual relationship, it pays to communicate with each other. And if there is an issue, and, explaining why you had to stop the sexual act or whatever can be good, so that you're on the same page.
Definitely. And I think that it's important for people to get this reminder in ongoing relationships. It can be easy to fall into a habit and feel like you're obligated to certain things.
Yeah.
In a happy, healthy relationship, you shouldn't have to feel like there is going to only be this one chance to do anything in particular.
Right.
A happy, healthy relationship.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
I think
you'll be able to revoke consent now and be able to pursue that later if you want.
Absolutely. I think that freedom is very important in a healthy relationship. Yeah, you shouldn't feel like, if I don't let them have sex with me, then I'm never going to get laid again or something. Yeah. Because that's shady, that's not good consent.
Awesome. What about the next point?
So the next one is you have the right to be told the truth. And that one's huge for me. I have very few hard and fast rules in my relationships, but honesty is like number one. I can't operate in good faith and I can't trust you if we don't have an honest relationship. So being told the truth is like a requirement. and yeah, and I think that that applies to like, lying by omission and to twisting the truth and like, some things in relationships are difficult to talk about, especially polyamory. So, I think that it's important to keep in mind that you owe your partner honesty. You owe yourself honesty, because if you're not being authentic to your own desires and limits and goals, then what are you even doing in a relationship or at all? Does that make sense?
Definitely. And this is your friendly reminder for me that I don't know is a valid answer.
Oh, yeah.
And not knowing is completely okay.
Yeah.
I feel that a lot of people end up lying to themselves or their partner because they're scared or unwilling to say that they don't know something when they're asked.
Yeah.
Or feel obligated to have an answer. And sometimes we don't always have the answers, even when we're being asked about what we want, think, or feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes those things come with time. But, similar to you, I very strongly value honesty.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'm honest to a fault.
Yeah, me too.
Keep in mind also that being honest does not mean that you have to be a dick. You can communicate honestly without being a jerk.
Very
you
true.
Do so compassionately. So the next point is that you have the ability to say no to requests. This almost seems a little bit like a copy of the consent one in my mind. Do you see it differently?
Well, like the first one, to be free of, the third one, to revoke consent. Is that the one you mean?
Yeah.
I feel like the revoke consent to any form of intimacy one is like specifically more sexual related, whereas to say no to requests is like, it could be related to your partner says, hey, I'd like to see you more times a week, 3 or
Yeah, I
three
guess
or,
so, because it does specify any form of intimacy.
Exactly. So this,
when I see consent, my brain automatically goes to the bigger version of consent, the more encompassing of like consent to all things and the ability to consent or not to consent to things in your life.
Yeah. But I think that saying no to requests can cover lots of different scenarios.
Yeah.
And like if your partner says, hey, I'd really like you to be friends with my other partner, my spouse or whatever, and you can say, no, thank you, or, not right now, or okay. You're allowed to say yes, you're allowed to say no to a lot of things.
Yep. Great point.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You want to hit the next point?
Yeah. So let's see. You have the right to hold and express different points of view. And that's an interesting one because there are some points of view, like especially political, ethical, moral ones, that if you disagree, that's a deal breaker for a lot of people. Like, maybe you could never be in a relationship with someone of the opposite political party, or, maybe you have to be of similar religious background or lack thereof or something. So, you get to decide what are requirements in your relationship, but not everybody's going to be able to fall into those categories, right? So to hold and express different points of view is a good thing. Nobody agrees on everything with their partner. So I think that, being able to have mature conversations about things that you disagree about. I disagree with my partners all the time, And so I think that being able to express those differing points of view without fear of some kind of backlash is very important, because that shows that you're more safe in the relationship.
I definitely agree. And I think that I see it more oftenly as time goes on, that people seem to be less willing to compromise on disagreeing with their partners or their friends on anything. And they're willing to delete people off of their Facebook or end relationships with them over things that may not be such a big deal in the aggregate or like in the bigger picture. But, for a lot of people, there are a lot of deal breakers. And I think a lot of those can be kind of covered up front in your relationships, broad political ideologies or relationship styles, or, wanting to have kids. Those are things that might make or break a relationship, but whether I can't even think of a good example of what might be something less drastic that I would end a relationship for.
I think what you're talking about makes me think a little bit of cancel culture, which is like kind of a new-ish phrase about people expect kind of political perfection from a lot of people, especially like famous figures. So, if someone's canceled, then it's like, we don't like that person anymore because they said such and such one time in an interview. And, different people have different requirements and hard limits for their relationships and whatnot, and for their friends. And so, like, could I ever be friends with someone who voted for so and so? It depends on what my limits are, right? So,
Yeah,
it's complicated, but yeah, I think that's good.
it is complicated. We could have a whole discussion at some point about a similar topic to that. The next point is to feel all of your emotions. As somebody with a mood disorder, that strikes really true to me. I had an event this weekend that I put a lot of emotional investment for some of my friends. Ended up not going the way I or any of us really wanted it to, and that was really, really crappy. And I felt a lot of feelings about that for a while.
Yeah.
The majority of my weekend was planning, having the event, coming to terms with how it went, and like the fallout from it. And I feel a lot better now that it's all over and that things are mostly resolved. But being able to have the freedom to feel your feelings.
I think this one is super relevant to a question we get a lot from monogamous people, which is, do you feel jealous? Because the answer is usually yes. People do feel jealous regardless of their relationship structure. It's about how you react to that feeling, and what the base, the primary emotion is, whether it's fear, insecurity, etc. So I think that the right to feel all of your emotions is important because you are allowed to feel jealous. It's just a matter of like, are you allowed to act shitty and abusive and passive aggressive to your partner because of your emotions? No, I would say no. But, you're allowed to feel your feelings. Your feelings aren't going to hurt you the way that, actions will.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I have seen a lot of new people come into the groups, like people that are new to polyamory or ethical non-monogamy, come into the groups and get upset at their partner for feeling feelings.
Yeah.
And people putting rules on their relationships about like, oh, if you catch feelings, then it should be over. Right. My general advice tends to be that you have very little control over your feelings, but you have a lot of control over your actions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And keeping that in mind and judging people more on how they treat you than what they feel, I feel like will probably end up being a lot more fruitful if you're trying to negotiate something in your relationship or fix a problem in your relationship.
Okay, so the next one is you have the right to feel and communicate your emotions and needs. This is obviously related to the previous one. I think that people are afraid to express their feelings sometimes because they think it's going to mess everything up or they're going to make their partner upset. But like we just said, your actions are what can kind of make or break the relationship, and what you feel is legitimate. It's real. It's chemicals bopping around in your brain. It's cause and effect. Those are things you genuinely experience. And your actions that you choose to take because of those emotions are separate. So being able to communicate your needs is important because if you don't, then they won't get met, probably. So if your need is, I would like to have a physical relationship with you, that could be a need. Or it could be a requirement of your relationship. Maybe not everybody is interested in having a non-sexual relationship. So, or your need could be, I would like to talk to you at least once a week over Skype. Or I would, my need is for you to respect that these elements of my past are triggers and be respectful of that or something. Like everybody has different needs. So yeah, to feel and communicate your emotions and needs, that's a great one. And I think very important.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. I think one way to put a finer point on this is to also consider if it's an appropriate time to communicate those feelings.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
If someone's in emotional distress, if they're just out from a new date and you're feeling a lot of insecurity.
Yeah.
There's sometimes, depending on the person, where it may not be a good time to communicate the things that you need to communicate right away.
Yeah.
And you should probably schedule a time with your partner.
I agree.
Specific day and a specific time. Tonight at 7, tomorrow at 3 p.m.
Yeah. And I find that
to-
having a regular date, like a regular check-in, I'm a big proponent of that. I have 2 dates a week with my
Definitely.
spouse, and on Wednesdays and Sundays, and we can sit down, eat something together, and talk if we want to. If there's anything we need to check in about our relationships, about my other partners, about his other people, whatever, that's a good time for that. I think that bringing a let's talk time can be very anxiety inducing for people. So in my opinion, having a regularly scheduled check-in is less anxious for me, because I go, okay, well, regardless of what's happened, I know I'll see my partner on Wednesday and we can talk about it.
I agree. I know that for me, after having 3 or 4 check-ins with a specific partner in a row that all go well
Yeah.
and that there is like good resolution for, I stopped feeling that anxiety entirely.
Good.
That may not be
Good for you.
it may not be everybody's experience, but something to keep in mind is that you may be able to get to a point in your relationship where you can say, hey, let's check in tomorrow. Like, and for me, I usually provided the context, and
Yes.
all my partners knew that I had a mood disorder. And so they, I'm having a lot of feelings right now. I'm not really sure how to communicate it right now, but I would like to talk to you about it later.
Yeah.
And would set up a time then. Or they would like really feel like they needed to talk to me when I was in a depressive episode. And I was like, I will not be able to give you good, valuable, or realistic information right now because my view of the world is very skewed.
Yeah, definitely. You can find us on Twitter, through email, or on Reddit. To submit your questions or to recommend topics, please reach out to our contact info in the show notes. You can find us on Twitter, through email, or on Reddit. To submit your questions or to recommend topics, please reach out to our contact info in the show notes.
This episode was edited by Jordan Davis, music by Antilude, and logo designed by Carmen Bolding.
The best way that you can help Lesson 83 is to share our podcast with your friends. Sharing is caring.